Alright, with the version livestream over, I can now start pumping out guides for all the new characters that we're getting in the next patch. And the first one is going to be the new Remembrance version of the Trailblazer, or RMC for short. Just like my other build guides, we first start with a brief explanation of their kit, followed by their Eidolons, then some build options, proper rotations, and finally, synergies. So leave a like if you find this video helpful, and let's get started. So the new Remembrance Trailblazer. They are a 5-star ice unit following the path of, well, Remembrance. They are what I would call a combination of a sub DPS and a support, as he can deal noticeable damage and also has damage boosting utility that he can use on his allies. The most unique thing about him is the unique buff that he provides. It's called True Damage, and currently it's one of the biggest damage increasing buff in the game. Looking at his base stats, it's nothing special here, everything is pretty average, besides his energy cost of 160, which is on the higher side. Starting with his traces, his basic attack deals ice damage to a single ally. The basic stuff. For his skill, he summons his Memosprite called Mem. If Mem is already on the field, then he restores his HP and grants it 10% charge. Now before I go further, let me give you a quick rundown of what a Memosprite is. It's basically a summon or guardian or spirit or whatever you call it, which acts as a 5th unit in your team. Now you can say it's just like Genuine's Lightning Lord or Topaz and Numbi, but there's actually a difference between them and the new Memosprites. Genuine's Lightning Lord or Numbi deals damage based on their respective characters' overall stats, but in case of Memosprites, they have their own stats based on which they deal damage. It's literally another unit, but that begs the question, do we need to build these new Memosprites separately? Well, not particularly. Memosprites takes a percentage of their master's stats, which in this case is the MC. So you just need to build the unit and their Memosprites will automatically inherit stats from their respective characters. The one place where you do need to invest some resources are the traces. Memosprites have their own skills. As I just said, literally a 5th unit in your team. So you need to make sure you level up all the Memosprite traces as well. And that's all you need to understand before using the new Remembrance units. Next is his talent. Memosprite Mem has an initial speed of 130, which is pretty much the average speed of any DPS unit in HSR. And max HP equal to 80% of the Trailblazer's max HP, plus 640 at level 10. And here is an example how Memosprite inherit the stats of their masters. Also here you can see that since there is no turn limit or stacks, the only way Mem exits the field is when they take damage and lose all their HP. Yup, Memosprites can take damage, and that is why the MC skill can summon and heal his Memosprite. Also, for every 10 energy generated by all allies in total, Mem gains 1% charge. With this, you can kind of see that Mem has a unique charge mechanic, where you need to gain charge in order to use Mem skills. Next is RMC's ultimate, which summons Mem and then grants it 40% charge. After that, enables Mem to deal ice damage to all enemies. Lastly, using his technique, RMC creates a dimension for 10 seconds. Enemies in this dimension will stand still, and after entering battle, all enemies' action will be delayed by 50% and also deal ice damage to all enemies. It's pretty basic stuff, easy to understand. Now we arrive in the Memosprite part. So Memosprites have two main traces, their talent and their skill. For Mem's talent, Friends Together, Mem buffs all allies crit damage based on his own crit damage stat, which is again inherited from the MC himself, so basically based on the MC's crit damage stats. It's one of the more generic buff that every single hypercarry support gives, like Sunday and Sparkle, but Mem provides this unconditionally to the whole party, which also qualifies the RMC for a pseudo AoE support. Aside from that, Mem has two types of skills based on charge. If the charge has yet to reach 100%, Mem uses Barry's Trouble during action, and when the charge reaches 100%, Mem immediately takes action, basically like an ultimate, and then uses Let Me Help You on a single ally. As for what these two skills do in battle, his normal skill, Barry's Trouble, deals 4 instances of damage, with each instance dealing ice damage to one random enemy, and after that finally, deals AoE ice damage to all enemies. So first is a bounce of ice damage, kinda like the Harmony MC skill, and then it's an AoE attack to all enemies. As for when Mem has full 100% charge, he immediately takes action and uses Let Me Help You, which advances the action of one designated ally by 100% and grants them Mem's support for 3 turns. So a 100% action advance just like any other hypercarry support. As for the buff, for every 1 instance of damage dealt by the target that has Mem's support, additionally deal 1 instance of true damage equal to 28% of the original damage, which is basically 28% of the final damage output. That means the unit deals 128% of his final damage to the enemies. If you still don't understand this, you can go check out my other RMC video. I went in a bit more detail on how true damage is calculated in that video, but TLDR, it's a massive damage increase. Lastly, when using this ability on the unit themselves, cannot trigger the action advance effect, just like any other hypercarry support. There are also 2 extra passive tied to Mem's talent. The first one immediately grants 50% charge when Mem is summoned, so it always starts with 50% charge. The next one increases the MC's action by 25% when Mem disappears or just dies, I guess. which is great as the MC can then take action fast and again summon Mem on the field. And that is all with the traces. Now there is a lot to take in as we are trying to understand kits of 2 units in one, so it will take time to get used to all these remembrance units. I'd recommend just playing them and understanding how they work while playing. As for his trace level up priority, level up the Memosprite Traces first, as they contain both the 2 damage buff and most of RMC's damage output. Then you can level up his ultimate and talent. Both are important, one deals damage and one increases Mem's HP. After that you can try leveling up his skill, which is not necessary, and his basic attack is even more worthless. He's ultimately a sub DPS / support. You don't have to max him out, just get the traces that deals damage and gives buffs to his teammates. Now after that long section, we can start with RMC's passives. His first passive increases his action by 30% at the start of the battle, and when Mem is first summoned, grants Mem 40% charge. So from Mem's own talent, it starts with 50% charge, and with this, it will start with 90% charge for the first turn, and given the RMC's action advance and taking the first turn, he can help Mem get 100% charge and start the battle with the DPS under the true damage buff. An awesome passive. His second passive is for Mem. When using Baddie's Trouble, which is his normal skill, Mem immediately gains 5% charge, which is kinda like how normal units gain energy when using their skills. Lastly, his third passive. When the max energy of the ally target that has Mem's support exceeds 100, for every 10 excess energy, additionally increases the multiplier of the true damage buff by 2%, up to a maximum of 20%. So basically the target needs to have at least 200 max energy to get the full 48% true damage buff. For his bonus stats, after maxing out his traces, RMC gains 37.3% crit damage, 14% attack, and 14% HP. Now it's time to look at his Eidolons. As this is the MC we are talking about, all of his Eidolons are going to be free to obtain from the story, though it may take a few patches to fully E6 him. The E1 increases the crit rate of the ally with the Mem support buff by 10%, which is nice, and the buff from the Mem support now takes effect on both the character and their Memosprite, if they happen to have one, kinda like Sunday. The E2 grants RMC 8 energy when any other Memosprite, except from Mem, takes action. This can happen once per RMC's turn, and this kinda makes him better if you play him with other Remembrance units. Now for his E4, when an ally target with 0 max energy actively uses an ability, Mem can also gain 3% charge, and the multiplier of the true damage buff for this target additionally increases by 6%. Now this can work for a lot of things, like characters such as Akron or Fei Xiao or Memosprites, because they do not have any energy mechanics on them. Mem works on charge, not energy, and not every Memosprite will have the charge mechanics. So basically, if you use this true damage buff on a Memosprite or unique characters like Akron or Fei Xiao, they will in total deal 34% true damage, not 54%, because since they do not have any energy, they cannot proc RMC's third passive that increases the multiplier of the true damage buff based on max energy. It's a nice feature that makes the RMC more versatile. Lastly, his E6 just gives RMC 100% crit rate for his ultimate. So now you can just focus on building crit damage, as Mem's crit damage buff for all allies is based on RMC's own stats. Overall, all of RMC's Eidolons add important utility to his kit. Since all of them are free to obtain, there is no requirement for any discussion about which one is better. You'll E6 him eventually. By the way, if you're enjoying the content, please consider subscribing, as it does help the channel grow and motivates me to make more content for you guys. Now it's time we learn how to build him. And here's an issue. Given he's of a brand new path, meaning he won't have a lot of options regarding builds, like his Lightcone choices, and even relics, because of which, his build section might be a bit shorter than my other build videos. Eventually we will get more Lightcones and relic options, but for now, we have to make do with what we have. So starting with the quickest Lightcone section of any other character guide in my channel. At the start of the new patch, we will get a few new Lightcones, specifically Remembrance Lightcones, few 3 stars and few 4 stars. And there is also one 5-star Lightcone, which is going to be Aglaea's signature. But for Mr. RMC, these 2 3-star Lightcones are absolutely not recommended. One gives a bunch of energy, but is only for the various first turn, though it may be useful for some 0 cycle clears, but as a general option, I don't recommend it. The other 3-star is just damage increase, which is fine, but RMC's personal damage, though not bad, but still not anything special. We want something that can help with his utility, and for that, there is only one option, the 4-star Lightcone called Victory in a Blink. It increases the various crit damage, which RMC needs for his crit damage buff. Then when the various Memosprite uses an ability on an ally target, the Lightcone will increase the damage dealt by all allies for 3 turns. And the true damage buff from Mem also lasts for 3 turns. So this Lightcone is just made for RMC. It perfectly synergizes with his kit, it helps with his personal damage, and increases his utility. Until we get other options, this Lightcone is the only one that I'll recommend using on the RMC. After that, let's look at his best relics. With a new planet, we are getting 2 new 4-piece sets, the Hero of the Triumphant Song and the Poet of Morning Collapse. This one is for a quantum DPS unit or someone who wants to be played slow, but the other one is perfect for RMC. The Hero of Triumphant Song set increases the various attack, and when the various Memosprite is on the field, it also increases speed, and after that, When the Memosprite attacks, this increases both the Warriors and the Memosprite's crit damage by 30% for 2 turns. This set does way too many things, but it perfectly synergizes with RMC's kit, and this is gonna be what I recommend using on the RMC. Other than that, you can also go for the Glacier set, as it also gives crit damage, even though it's not as consistent as the new set, and also, who farms this domain anyways? Just try to get 4 pieces of this new set as soon as possible, even if the substats are trash. This is one of those sets where the set passive is more valuable than substats on each pieces. For his ornaments, there are 2 options. There is the banana set, it increases crit damage if there is a Memosprite present on the field. The second is going to be the Penacony set, for when you're using another Remembrance unit on the team. And for those times, this set performs better than the banana set. Otherwise, both are pretty much equal in value. Although the extra 5% energy regen may come in handy, and since it's a set that is already present in the game for farming, most of you will already have a good set ready. So given their close performance, I guess it's better to stick with Penacony set if you already have one. For stats, just as my usual guides, here's a reference build that you can take a look at. For stats on each pieces, go for crit damage on the body, both attack and speed are fine in the boots, attack will increase the overall damage of the Memosprites, but speed is also nice for more action, and that will generate more charges for Mem. But since you get 1% charge for 10 energy, the difference isn't that high, so an attack boot will provide you with overall better damage. At the end of the day, just pick one with better substats. You want to use ice damage on the sphere, because RMC is still a sub DPS, as a result you want to maximize his damage. And finally, an ERR rope. There is no other choice here. RMC has a 160 energy cost ultimate, so an ERR rope is the only way. For stat goals, there's only one thing to focus on here, and that is his crit damage. Mem's passive increases the entire team's crit damage based on the various stats, so try to get as high crit damage as you can. For his rotations, because of his base kit having no weird energy mechanics or anything, it's very easy to play him. There are basically 2 ways that in my opinion have the best outcome. One rotation is SP neutral and another is SP positive. The SP neutral rotation which I recommend is where you alternate between using a skill and basic attack, and with an ERR rope, it will take 4 to 5 turns to get his ultimate. As for the SP positive rotation, where you will use a skill basic playstyle, it will take about 5 to 6 turns to get his ultimate. Keep in mind that this is RMC's own ultimate, which is not as important as Mem's skill that gives the true damage buff. For that, we first need to look at the average energy generation of a team, which is around 100 energy, and that consists of DPSs using skill, supports using basic attack and skill, and the extra energy from killing enemies and getting hit by the enemies. So in total, you get at least 100 energy per a whole team turn, and that will grant Mem about 10% charge, or more as it gains 1% charge for every 10 energy generated by all allies. And in that sense, combined with RMC's skill, his second passive, and the occasional ultimates from the RMC, that straight up gives 40% charge at once. Also, whenever Mem is summoned back, it always starts with 50% charge. So in total, you should be able to maintain a 2 to 3 turn skill from Mem. And you don't have to worry about speed points, as Mem's speed is 130, which is what an average DPS usually have. Lastly, for a first turn rotation, for all you zero cyclers, here is how it's gonna go. RMC takes the first turn, as his action is advanced by 30% at the start of the battle, because of his first passive. He then uses his skill, summons Mem for the first time, and grants it 10 charges, through RMC's skill. Now because this is the first time Mem is summoned, RMC's first passive grants Mem 40% charge, making it 50%, and Mem also has a passive that whenever it is summoned, Mem starts with 50% charge. So adding all that, you get to 100% charge. You then use Mem's buffed skill, an action advance and buff your DPS in the first turn, and that's it. Alright, after that, finally it's time to talk about synergies. Now as a somewhat hypercarry support and sub DPS, with a universal buff that can help any and all damage dealers, it's hard to pick one team. So I'm going to talk about types of units. The first and the newest one being Remembrance units. Right now we only have Aglaea, but she pairs super well with RMC. Since the buff multiplies the final damage, and no matter how many hits there are, Aglaea's own and her Memosprite damage gets a huge boost. And all the buffs like crit damage and some crit rate from RMC's Eidolons also helps a lot. Not to mention playing with another Memosprite in the team will generate more energy for RMC, resulting in frequent ultimates that will lead to more damage. Overall, a great unit to use RMC with. The next are going to be the high ultimate cost units, like Argenti and Yunli. Especially Yunli. From all the beta footage that I've seen, Yunli gains a lot from RMC, and since she counterattacks a lot, she makes the most of the true damage buff. Also, more attacks means more energy gain, that will give Mem more charges. And also, because of her high energy cost, she can max out Mem's true damage buff and get the total 48% of it. Argenti does have similar results, but not as insane as Yunli. Any other remaining crit DPS can also benefit from RMC's buffs. It's a universal buff that increases the final damage. You can literally use any DPS of your choice. But there are some points you need to know. If the DPS doesn't have high energy cost ultimate, they cannot max out the true damage buff. But still, he has crit damage buff and action advance. Who doesn't like that? Also, more and more units are getting released with really high energy cost, like the Herta, who can also benefit a ton from RMC. Her enhanced skills nuke damage and ultimate damage will be heavily increased with RMC's true damage buff. And since RMC is so SP friendly, it can really help players who do not plan to pull for Herta's signature Lightcone that generates skill points, as she at E0 is a pretty SP heavy unit. Lastly, the teams that I'm most curious about are break teams. Now I haven't seen any footage on this, so do take this part with a grain of salt. But if true damage buff does work with break damage, then units like Firefly, Rappa, and especially Bootle will see a huge increase in popularity. As if you're someone who didn't pull for Fugue, then using RMC with Bootle would be the best option. He has the 100% action advance that Bronya usually provides to Bootle. But unlike Bronya, where her other buffs do not work on Bootle, RMC's true damage will work. As for the rest, Firefly can benefit from RMC, but it's the same thing as Fugue. Firefly at base is just so well designed that the damage difference is minimum compared to units like Bootle or even Rappa. Unlike the Harmony MC, who was tied to only break teams, RMC is a super universal unit. Although not better than premium supports like Sunday, he can be used in place of them. He can work as a hypergauge support in place of Sunday, or can even replace Robin, as he can also buff crit damage of all allies, and work as a team-wide support. He is definitely one of the most valuable MC variant that we have seen thus far, and his versatility to be able to fill in with every single damage dealer in the game is proof of that. Overall, the new RMC will remain a top tier support until we get a new 5-star unit that can also provide true damage buff, and even after that, he will still have his uses. Just like it is with the Harmony MC, Fugue is definitely better than him, but that doesn't mean he's unusable now. I highly recommend building the RMC the moment you get him, and that is especially for new players. As with him, you automatically get a better support than Bronya, who every new player wants when they start playing. And that is going to be it for this guide. Even though the build section wasn't that long, because of the Remembrance units having 2 separate kits in one, this video became quite long. But regardless, I hope you find this helpful. If you have any further questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll try my best to answer them. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.